I'm going to apologize in advance. We're still doing the floors in the other room.
Oh, that's why.
So that's why we're in here. It's not too bad. We're finishing the concrete.
Oh, okay. Really comfortable in here.
Yeah, music's a little loud.
I think we're okay.
So I will speak louder. We are doing a live feed, so people that are not able to be here are able to watch and listen. Cool. And every week, guys, if you miss anything, we're recording it too, so we're putting it up so you can go back and see what we did. If you happen to miss it or you just want to get a refresh. It's probably very important now that what I say, I don't mess up. You can go back and critique. Wait a minute, you said that. So last week we started the beginning of angels and demons going book to book. Okay? Started with Genesis 6. And really the purpose of doing this is to start looking at these stories that involve angels as a basis of something big happening. Okay? The angels are spoken about over 250 times throughout the Bible. Right? But the purpose of us studying this is not to get closer to angels, but to get closer to God in our study of the angels.
Right.
And to see how God uses angels and how he's used angels in the history of man from the very beginning all the way to the very end. And why some of these things that we read are so important for us to recognize. Like, for example, several weeks ago, we brought up a verse that it spoke about. I don't remember where the verse is. I think it's in Peter. It talks about be kind to everybody because you never know if you're entertaining an angel.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And why this is so important is what we're going to start finding out. And we're going to start to see how these stories and how short they may be, but how big they are to the history of mankind and the history of the Bible, and how the Bible interacts with each other from the beginning to the end. Okay, you've heard pastors probably speak about this before, where they say the Bible has no contradictions. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to understand why they say that. Right? Not only because, well, it's the handwritten Word of God,
right,
but as you start to study these things, you start to see you start to see a consistency throughout, right? And a continuity, and how the New Testament writers go back to the Old Testament and where those stories actually are derived from. Okay. So today we're going to actually go into Exodus. We did a Genesis last week. Genesis 6, we spoke about the Nephilim. We spoke about the 120 years, why this was such a big, why these 6 verses was such a big, created such a big story in history from the flood, right? How the angels who turned the fallen angels had compromised the entire planet with their hybrid breeding, and God had to step in and go, okay, here's the flood.
Yeah.
Okay? We're going to start to see how God uses these angels as well, moving into Exodus. Now, a lot of people, when Exodus is there's some very big reading in Exodus right at the beginning in chapter 3, right? Exodus is typically known as the Book of the Covenant. It is where Moses, where we find a lot of the stories that we know, like the burning bush, right? This is where the tablets, the Ten Commandments were made. This is where there's a lot of things that go on in this book, right? but there's 3 verses that we're going to cover today that are very specific to angels and God using angels into a very big change and how that can relate to our lives. As I'm speaking, and I'm speaking louder, I can hear the drums behind me, and I'm trying to speak to a microphone. Gotcha. Hopefully you guys can still hear me that are listening and watching live. So let's get started. Book of the Kid. This is the last section. So we're gonna first, let's read the verses first. I sent you guys the verses. Some of you, if you're on that text chain, had a little bit of time to read them. But I'm going to read them right now for everybody. So we're starting in Exodus chapter 23. Now there is 40 chapters in Exodus, so we're
a little more than halfway.
a little more than halfway. And if you've read Exodus, let's be honest, it's a tough book to read.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very old historical book that is a little bit difficult to read. Yeah. So we're going right into a little over half of it. Okay. And I would say this is the last part of the Book of the Covenant. So, starting with verse 20. Behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious toward him, for he will not pardon your transgression, since my name is in him. But if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. Okay? Now this is God, verse 20. 20, 21, 22, and 23. Chapter 23.
23 verse 20.
Yep, chapter 23. So Exodus chapter 23, verse 20. Okay? Three little verses in a huge book. Okay? To give you an idea, Genesis has 50 chapters. Exodus has 40 chapters, and they're 2 of the longer books.
Right.
Besides Psalm, Job has 43 chapters. You can see how besides Jeremiah and Isaiah, this is one of the largest books. Okay, so we're pretty far in there. But being that it's a large book, we're speaking about 3 verses. Okay, so we also are going to start to see how valuable a single verse can be. And what it means for the entire story from the Old and New Testament. Okay, so as we've read these verses, we see that it concentrates. It has a very big emphasis on obedience, right? Mm-hmm. It also concentrates on what the Lord promised to do on Israel's behalf. Okay, pretty simple. Angel's going to go before you. Do what he says. Don't contradict him. Don't be rebellious. And he's going to destroy all your enemies. Right? I'm gonna take care of all your. So imagine it today. Here's God going, hey, listen. All you got to do is here's my angel. Listen to him. Don't talk back. Just do what he says, and all your problems are going away. And I'm going to give you this. This huge. It's not even just one country. I'm going to give you all of these nations. Right, are going to be yours. Okay, right. So that's the basis of this, right? But in this, he specifically promises what? He promises an angel to be there, right? An angel to guide them, an angel to tell them what to do, and more importantly, an angel to go before them and prepare the way, right? If only they would obey God's voice. That's it. That's their only requirement, right? Obey my voice. Hey, now, wherever you'd like to sit.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So verses 20, they deal with the angel of the Lord sent and what this angel was going to do, right? The section starts, anytime you see a verse start with behold, you probably should pay attention, right? It's something important that they're going to be speaking about. So verse 20, the Lord promises to send an angel before Israel. Now, what's interesting is this identity of this angel has been discussed throughout different theologians because the Hebrew word for angel, I think I'm pronouncing this right, is malak. It's M-A-L, A-K. And that's what word is used here in Hebrew, in the Hebrew text. Okay? But malak actually just means messenger. So in many instances throughout the Old Testament, we see this word malak, and it actually identifies indicates a human, right? And what happens in the translations is they'll use messenger or ambassador for the word, right? So in the Hebrew text, whenever you see messenger or ambassador, the Hebrew word is malak, which is angel, okay? But it can mean both things. So a good example is, if you call a baby an angel, oh, you're such an angel, right? Is that baby an angel? No. It's a human, but it's a descriptive, right? Instead of an actual, not even a pronoun, but it kind of is. I guess it could be, right? I'm surprised nobody's identified as an angel today. But in this case, obviously, we're not speaking about a human, right? This is a celestial being, an entity from God that is an angel. And how do we know this? Because no human could possibly do what God is saying this angel is going to do. This one person cannot go in and be the guard against all of these nations, right? No human can perform that. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people in these nations that are located in the promised land that they're supposed to take over, right? So we know it's a celestial being. We know it is a spiritual being that God has sent. And if we remember, in those days, we have to think in our mind, especially after we read Genesis 6, that these celestial beings probably looked different then than they do now. God probably showed them differently then than they do now. Okay? Just because we don't see them today in a manner that that some of the stories relate to us, doesn't mean that that's not how it was, right? And we can see that in some of these stories. Now, this is interesting, is this is written the same way as the angel of the Lord was presented in chapter 3 with Moses in the burning bush.
Right.
We're even going to see some other similarities that we can see that this angel is persistent. This specific angel is persistent from the beginning to going all the way through the books of Joshua, right? Because this angel has to be both benevolent, but also have a side to him that you don't want to cross, right?
Right.
Because if he's the one that's guarding against these nations, well, that means there's some people that aren't going to be living anymore. And this is why God sends these angels, right? To work in this manner. But this is very specific to a spiritual being that God has sent, right? Much like Gabriel or Michael. There are some people that believe that it's like a pre-incarnate Christ, right? Because the way that it is written, for example, it's unlikely that an ordinary angel could pardon somebody's transgressions. He would not say it unless there was an idea that it could be, right? But one thing that's very interesting is that when he is saying this, and he's saying this in a manner that this specific context is speaking about the not their past transgressions, but their obedience to the words that the angel is saying right now, here and now. I kind of look at it like this. Miss Benita, you were a teacher, right? Yeah. So I'm assuming that when the teacher left the room, they said, "Hey, everybody, listen to Miss Benita. When you're speaking to her, you're speaking to me, right? So you respect her and do what she says. If you don't, there's going to be trouble, right?" We can see God's kind of doing the same thing here. So here's the angel that I'm placing. You know, when you're speaking to him, it's like you're speaking to me. I am in him. And that's where that verse comes into play, where it says, you know, I am in him, right? Interesting how we go back to the verse about the messengers, that you always have to be kind and courteous to everybody that you speak to, because you never know if you're entertaining an angel. It goes to this verse. God has a remnant of himself in everybody, right? Including the angels. So when you're speaking to the angel, it's like you're speaking to God, right? When you're speaking to people, it's like you're speaking to God. Why else would we not have the verses where it asks us to do everything as if we're doing it for the Lord? All the work that you do with a gracious heart, with a happy heart, because the work you're doing is for the Lord. Everything we do is for God, even though we don't, even in this case. And it's interesting how you could have an entire nation being given this instruction, even having the visibility of this angel, and how you can still become rebellious, how you can still think you can get away with something when you can see God, right? Through these
that's the enemy's job, to deceive you.
I'm sorry?
That's the enemy's job, to deceive you.
That is to pull you away, right? But I know that when he is saying that the angel would not pardon the transgression since my name is in him, it's basically saying this provision is not waived, right? You have to obey. There's no middle ground. You either are or you're not, right? If you do, then this is what you're going to get. If you don't, you're going to get a blessing if you do. If you don't, no blessing. Pretty cut and dry, right? Sadly, this generation did not obey, right? We know the history of the Israelites, how they were brought to the promised land. But what happened? They didn't receive their blessing.
No.
Right? And that blessing was, you're going to take over all of these different lands. All of these enemies of yours are going to be under you, or you're going to be under them. We all know the story, and we'll continue and see what happens here. Okay? In verse 22 and 23, the Lord promised victory if the Israelites obeyed the angel. Okay? The condition was for them to truly obey his voice and do all that I say. That's in verse 22, right?
Do all that I say.
Do all that I say.
Yeah.
Now, hear how he says that. Truly obey his voice and do all that I say. Right? So God is telling them that this angel is speaking for me.
Right.
The words he's speaking are my words.
Right.
Do all that he says. Now, we can also see that how this works within our lives today, right? We know that there are times where there is an interjection of the Spirit, that the Holy Spirit speaks for you, right? What the words that you're saying, you may not even have any understanding of what you're saying, but the Lord is speaking for you, right? on the other side, right? Miss Kathy, you've seen people drink too much, and then the words they speak are not from God, but they're from a dark, dark place, right? They've opened a portal, and they're speaking something that, woo-hoo, man, there is a spirit speaking. I don't know what that spirit is, but I don't like it, right? So we can see how they can speak through us, right? And in this case, God is saying, hey, these words are mine. You better listen to the words that he's saying. In the same manner, we go back to verse 3 in Genesis with the burning bush. We know that God is not, he says it. Nobody can see me without dying. Right? So he saw a burning bush. Right? And the beginning of that chapter, the beginning of that is an angel of the Lord presented himself to Moses. Right? Right? And spoke to Moses in the burning bush. Right? Well, we know the burning bush wasn't. Because Moses still lived, right? So it had to have, that angel of the Lord had to have been the messenger for God, right? For the words of God. That's why we have messengers. But in verse 22, basically it came down to them obeying what he was saying, obey my words, and that all that I say, and the result will be the Lord God will be on your side. The Lord God will be an enemy to your enemies, an adversary to your adversaries. If anyone opposes the Israelites in Canaan, the Lord would fight and protect them. And when they reach the promised land, the Lord's angel will go before and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. This is a huge promise being made by God through the angel. But we need to understand why this is such a big importance, is that the angel was the point at which they were to obey, as he's giving instructions, obey the angel that has been placed. Right? The angel actually would be the one that defeated the peoples currently living in the promised land and ensure victory for Israel. We've seen in other places where we know angels can come in, one angel can slay a legion of men. Right? We learned that about a month and a half ago how we multiplied the 70, the legion. When Jesus said, I can have 12 legions here, we learned how many actually people that is. It's like 13 billion people that angels can slay. Right? They can completely decimate, wipe out the entire earth without any issue. So we can see when he's saying that that this one angel can go in and decimate all of the enemies that you have. We can see how that's true, right?
Showing off the power of God.
Yeah. The second generation of Israel actually is the one that experiences this, right? And we see this. This is where we see a continuation, a continuity of it, where the angel of the Lord makes his presence known again, right? In the same manner. And there's different thoughts on this, but I believe that it is actually the same angel of the Lord that was sent from the time of when Moses was burning bush.
Right.
Why would God send a different angel if an angel had already made himself known and presented himself to Moses once? Don't you think he'd probably send the same angels? Because when Moses first ran into this, imagine Moses, angel of the Lord, burning bush. We got to know that dude was freaking out.
Oh yeah,
a little bit.
I would
Right?
think so.
A little bit. Remember, they didn't have video cameras to be able to prove that, because Moses was going, man, you know what? Imagine the first person he told. Hey, so there's a bush up there.
it's on fire, buddy.
How many people probably went, Moses, how much have you been drinking, man?
Yeah.
But we actually see the second generation of Israel actually receiving the blessing that was supposed to be gone for the first generation. This one that was led into the promised land, they were supposed to receive this blessing, but they disobeyed the angel. Right. So it was the second generation that actually received this blessing, and we see this in Joshua 5. And when we get to the book of Joshua, this is the story that we are going to go through, right? What's going to be interesting is as we go book to book, you're going to see a continuity that takes place with these angels. You're going to start to see the same angel popping itself up. And instead of just these stories being of some angel, you're going to develop a relationship with the same angel that keeps popping himself up. As we know, is it not the same angel that presented themselves to Mary? Which angel was this?
Wasn't it Gabriel?
Gabriel, right?
Yeah.
Gabriel was the chief messenger of angels. Like if you were going to bring news, Gabriel was doing it. What other stories do we know Gabriel to be attached to?
Gabriel the
For
archangel.
John the Baptist,
Mm-hmm.
fourth birth.
Yeah.
There was a priest. It's the one who a priest about that Jesus, when Mary brought him Jesus, the baby, to the temple, this priest
He
knew.
recognized. Yeah.
I don't know if there was an angel involved in that or not.
I know there was the angel that told when Jesus arose from the tomb.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was the same angel, Angel Gabriel. When he
if it's-
told them, if you're looking for Jesus, he's not here.
If it's bringing a message
Mhm.
in that manner,
Mhm.
if you're talking and it's presented, it's coming from the chief, and we know that they're different. Gabriel is a messenger, Michael is a fighter, Raphael is a healer, right? So we know that different stories we can point the direction of what angel it is.
Elijah and the old woman
Mhm.
with the son.
Yes, that's the story. When he goes and the oil and the flour
Right.
and he presents himself. Yeah, exactly. Now this one, you're going to start to see a representation here that's very interesting, because in Joshua 5, someone that looks like a man appears to Joshua stating that he is the captain of the Lord's army. Okay. And that Joshua was to remove his sandals because the ground where they stood was holy. Okay. We all know the story of Joshua, and he was instrumental in bringing. What did he do? Walls of Jericho.
Knocked the walls down.
Knocked the walls down.
Yeah.
What knocked the walls down? Angel of the Lord. Right.
Through an earthquake.
This is extreme. But if we notice I'm going to say this again, and I'm going to read this last part in Joshua. Captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. So Joshua did so. Now, this is very, very, very similar to what the angel of the Lord spoke to Moses, right? Beginning with the burning bush, okay? And he commanded him to remove his sandals. In Exodus 3, God called to him in the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. He said to him, here I am. And he said, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Okay? We can see that it very similar stories. The angel of the Lord that appeared in a burning bush. So it's possible that the captain of the Lord's army, would it not be a captain of the Lord's army that would go in and destroy the nations? That would be the first, that would lead them into the promised land? Would it not be the captain of the Lord's army that would present himself in the burning bush with Moses and also take down the walls of Jericho and Joshua?
Yeah.
We can see a very similar setup. Now we can say, okay, well, it's God. Of course it's God, but God uses familiarity for us
Right.
so we can be comforted right? God is a God of comfort. Why would he keep sending something different? He doesn't,
No.
right? He's consistent. In the obviously, when we read the Bible, we can see the consistency, and now we can start to see the consistency with these stories when we're dealing with angels, right? What's interesting is that we can't see the consistency in stories with people per se with the Bible. Why? What do you think that is?
Consistent.
Because they change their mind all the time.
That and people die.
Yeah.
So the same people that were in Genesis, that can't be the same people that are in Joshua,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
And they can't be the same people in Psalm, and they can't be the same people, right? Why? Because they die. Angels don't die.
Right.
So we can see the consistency that they keep coming up.
Oh, yeah.
They keep coming up.
Mhm.
And if we look at the single verses like we're doing here, we just read literally 3 verses. And there's so much to it. It changed the history of the Israelites. From one commandment, obey what the angel says,
Right.
and you receive blessing. Obey, and all your enemies are now my enemies. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine hearing that? All your enemies are my enemies.
All you have to do is obey.
All your adversaries are my adversaries. It's like the military, right? It really is. Like if you don't obey the general, right? They go before you. They prepare a way. Even when I was a paratrooper, even though we were quote unquote anywhere in the world in 18 hours, first ones in, quick, fast response, right? No, we were not the first ones in. There was somebody higher up that knew where we were going in because they had already scouted it. They'd already done everything. So, right. So it's a very, very similar to that. Okay. But the army, the captain of the Lord's army appears in Joshua right before they conquered the city of Jericho by miraculous circumstances.
Right.
Right. We also see that taking place where the angels are present, miracles take place.
Yep.
Miracles happen. Right. But we can see that God does indeed fight for Israel, but he will ask the people to engage and fight as well. Here's what's also very important. And trust God will fight with them. Obedience, and we learn from these 3 verses with the angel that obedience and engagement is necessary component for experiencing the covenant blessing, right?
True.
We can see it in Joshua. They had to do something. It's not just obeying. It's not just doing as I say, but it's active engagement,
Right.
right? It is.
It's the
God will meet you halfway in everything that you do. You just have to trust that you take that step, he is taking a step. You have to trust when you get to that halfway mark, he'll already be waiting.
Right.
Right? But it takes active engagement. We're not sheep, as much as people say we are.
Right.
But we truly are not sheep.
No.
Right? Okay, moving on. 6 nations that occupied the land of Canaan were defeated by Israel's God, right? The Amorites appeared as a group. I'm just going to go through the different, so we understand how big this region was and how important these different nations were. Okay, the 6 nations. These are not tribes; these are nations, right? When you see the word tribe, they are nations. Just like today, a way to think about that is you have sovereign tribes. 586 sovereign nations in the United States. 586 sovereign nations that are not the United States, but that are located in the United States. Right? The Indian nations, right? Native American Indian nations, Navajo, Apache, Cherokee, these are sovereign nations.
Right.
But we know them as what? Tribes.
Tribes. Yeah.
So when we're looking at the Bible and they talk about tribes, right? The 12 tribes, we're talking about nations, sovereign nations, not just little tribes, but actual nations, right? But the 6 nations occupied in the land of Canaan were defeated by God, the Amorites appeared as a group that covered 5 major kingdoms in ancient Near East: Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. And that's according to Joshua 10. The Hittites may have been the descendants of Canaan through Heth. They lived around Hebron. The Perizzites were a group of people who lived in unwalled suburbs, both east and west of the Jordan. The Canaanites lived by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. The Hivites were the peoples of Shechem in the days of Jacob. And then they constituted the population of Gibeon. The Jebusites were the occupants of the region later associated with the tribe of Benjamin, especially the city of Jerusalem. These 6 nations were to be defeated because they were not part of God's covenant. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, all they had to do was obey the angel. They didn't obey the angel, and what happened?
They lost.
They lost. They went into captivity, right?
Yeah.
They didn't. The enemies, their enemies did not become God's enemies, right? The adversaries did not become His adversaries. That's what we learned in 3 verses. How important these angels become, right?
Right.
And now we can see how these angels are starting to track, right? We're going to start to see the same angel appearing, right? What also have we, other places where we see the angel of the Lord, that statement, the angel of the Lord appeared. We see it with Saul,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We see it with David. We start to see there's a consistency,
Yeah.
right? So, does anybody have any questions?
Which part of Joshua were you reading earlier?
Joshua 5.
Okay, Joshua 5. And
Yep.
then you skipped over to 10, right? You said Joshua 10?
Joshua 10, when we were discussing that's just going through the Amorites.
Yeah. Okay.
That gives the
Joshua 5.
kind of the description of the Amorites, where we get their description of what region they were in. Yeah.
One thing that I get connected is that people these days will realize that, like just back then, God went before them with an angel.
Yes.
If people these days will realize God is going to go before you, anything, anybody, or anything you're going to do, whether you're going to go to the hospital or procedure or whatever, He's going to go before you and be there already.
Yeah.
Even if you're going out of town, whatever it may be, people just got to trust and say God is going with you.
Yeah.
He's going before you.
Trust in the Lord and
Yeah.
shall
He's
be
going to
saved.
go and prepare a way.
Right.
Yeah.
He's going to prepare, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I didn't have any fear going into the surgery.
Yeah.
I didn't. I just thought, okay, Lord, just pray that I come out of surgery, and the anesthesia okay, that they don't give me too much.
Yeah.
I'll come up like, woohoo.
We start to realize also that our ability to prepare is really trapped in a mindset of vanity, that we have the control to prepare. How in the world can you control to prepare for a surgery?
You got to trust.
You know what I mean? Like these are the things that we start to think about and see, that we go, wait a minute, we have no way of being able to change anything, or even do anything about it, because we're not even going to be awake.
I was going to say, they're going to put you to sleep. So
Yeah.
you don't even know.
We're not even going to be
You're gonna be
we're not even going to be coherent. But in our mindset,
Right.
and you know what's interesting is the reason that we have that mindset, why we have this call it a wandering mind, is because we're made in the image of God, right? And that word image, we all think, oh, well, God looks like me. No, it's made in the imagination of God.
Right.
We carry and share a very, very incredible imagination. And in our minds, we imagine that we have control over things that we have absolutely no control over. It'd be amazing if we did, right? But we see it in even how many superhero movies do we have?
Oh, gosh.
Where we have somebody that can control that aspect of, like, it's in our imagination. Oh, what if we had somebody that could fly? What if we had this?
There's a movie out called The Beekeeper. You're saying like the angel can do anything. Well, this beekeeper was supposedly this guy who worked for the government,
Mm.
very secret area of the government, and he was able to wipe out anybody that he came up against, a whole a whole unit of FBI agents,
Mm.
he just killed them all.
Mm.
But because his objective was to destroy this group of people who were stealing, over the internet, they steal your money through
Mm.
What is that?
That-
I think I've
the
seen that.
beekeeper.
I think I've
Anybody-
seen that.
It was almost like you were just for him, even though he was killing all these people,
I think I've seen
because
that.
he was like that angel who would, he was just
Come
wiping
before
out.
you.
Yeah.
But so I bet that was made like with that kind of idea in mind, like
Yeah.
he was indestructible, like an angel. He could just go before you and take
Writers
care
have
of
an
it all.
imagination.
Mhm.
Writers have an imagination.
Yeah.
That's why we just have to pray about everything. I mean, just pray for the service, pray for
Yeah.
whoever.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Well, we're all set. We're done. If anybody has any other questions, like I said, this has been recorded. Thank you guys, whoever's online and watching right now. We'll have this recorded. So if you want to go back and you missed like verses or anything like that, of course you can always ask me as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to start also putting out a outline,
Mhm.
so you have the ability
Oh,
to
Right now, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we can post that as well as a transcript, so you
Yeah.
can go through my notes and
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lori.
thank you guys. Good morning. You doing okay, Mama? You okay? All right.
Can you get up? Yeah, can you? Yeah, I can get up.
Thank you, guys.
And Matt can get up, but we can get up.
Lori, have you thought about maybe
Maybe.
looking into getting, I don't know how expensive it would be, like a little mic, they could connect to